Did Shedeur Sanders just pull off the boldest move in modern NFL history, an $80 million Paris fashion deal, ownership rumors with a billion-dollar brand, billionaire projections before his rookie season even settles? But here's the real question: is this unstoppable momentum or marketing hype we haven't fully questioned yet? What happened in Paris wasn't just a fashion appearance, it was a statement. When Shedeur Sanders stepped into Paris Fashion Week alongside Amiri, it wasn't some quiet celebrity cameo. This was a public, deliberate moment, cameras flashing, industry elites watching, and a luxury house making it clear that this young quarterback wasn't just an athlete, he was a cultural asset. Paris Fashion Week isn't just another red carpet event, it's one of the most exclusive stages in global fashion. Designers don't casually hand that spotlight to anyone, especially not active NFL players still trying to establish themselves on the field. So when Amiri brought Shedeur and even Shiloh into that space, it sent a signal far beyond style. This wasn't about clothes. It was about positioning. Luxury brands have been chasing cultural relevance for years. They don't just want fame, they want influence that feels authentic. Shedeur represents a new kind of athlete, confident, image-aware, business-minded, and deeply connected to a younger audience that moves culture through social media in real time. And that's where this move gets interesting. Instead of waiting for post-season accolades or MVP conversations, Shedeur's brand momentum accelerated off the field first. Some fans celebrated it as visionary. Others questioned the timing. Can a quarterback still proving himself in the league carry this level of crossover spotlight? That debate quietly started building the moment the photos hit the internet. But here's what can't be ignored: the symbolism mattered. An NFL quarterback standing in a European luxury arena represents a shift. The league has always produced stars, but rarely do they enter high fashion at this level this early. Traditionally, that lane was reserved for retired legends or global icons who had already cemented their legacy. Shedeur is attempting it in real time. And whether critics like it or not, that takes confidence. Some analysts believe this signals the growing power of athletes as standalone brands. In today's era, performance is only part of the equation. Marketability, personality, and cultural reach can move just as fast, sometimes faster, than stats on a scoreboard. But that doesn't mean there aren't risks. The brighter the spotlight, the louder the scrutiny. When you walk into Paris Fashion Week as a centerpiece figure, expectations don't shrink, they multiply. Every incomplete pass, every slow start, every tough loss suddenly gets framed against the backdrop of high fashion headlines. And that's when the narrative shifts. Because Paris wasn't just a celebration moment. It was the beginning of a bigger conversation about whether Shedeur Sanders is simply expanding the athlete blueprint or stepping into pressure that few quarterbacks have ever navigated this early in their careers. And that conversation was only getting started. The number hit social media like a lightning strike: $80 million. That's the figure reports attached to Shedeur Sanders' alleged deal with Amiri. And the moment that number surfaced, the conversation shifted from celebration to scrutiny. Because $80 million isn't a normal endorsement headline. According to circulating reports, the deal would position Shedeur as a central ambassador for the American market, potentially including runway appearances and long-term brand collaboration. If true, that would place him in rare territory, especially for a quarterback still early in his professional career. But here, where things get complicated. As of now, there has been no publicly released contract breakdown confirming the exact financial structure. No official filing, no verified payout terms, just reported figures spreading rapidly across sports and fashion media. And when numbers grow that large, analysts start asking questions. Is it guaranteed money? Is it performance-based? Is it a multi-year valuation projection rather than upfront cash? Those details matter. For context, even established NFL superstars typically structure endorsement deals with layered incentives, base pay, bonuses, royalties, equity components. An $80 million flat endorsement for a young quarterback would be extraordinary, not impossible, but extraordinary. Some fans believe the figure reflects the long-term value of the partnership rather than a single guaranteed payout. Others suggest it could include runway appearances, global campaigns, and collaborative collections rolled into one projected number. Without confirmed documentation, the structure remains unclear. And that uncertainty is what sparked debate. Supporters argue that Shedeur's cultural reach justifies bold investment. He carries a massive social media presence, strong jersey sales momentum, and crossover appeal that luxury brands crave. From that perspective, a high valuation isn't shocking, it's strategic. Critics, however, see inflation. They point to the gap between on-field resume and reported endorsement magnitude. They question whether fashion headlines are outpacing football achievements, not as an attack, but as a business reality check. And that's where the nuance lives. Luxury brands don't think like sports franchises. They don't invest based purely on touchdowns and playoff wins. They invest in influence, visibility, narrative power. If Amiri believes Shedeur represents a cultural bridge between American football and global fashion, the valuation may reflect that broader strategy. Still, until official figures are publicly confirmed, the $80 million headline sits in that gray space between verified deal and amplified report. And that gray space is exactly what keeps this story alive. Because whether the number is precise, projected, or partially speculative, it accomplished one undeniable thing. It made the entire NFL world stop and look. The Gatorade conversation might be even more explosive than the fashion headlines. According to circulating reports, Shedeur Sanders was allegedly offered a massive endorsement package from Gatorade, a deal rumored to be worth around $60 million over multiple years. For most young athletes, that's an instant signature, guaranteed money, immediate security, no hesitation. But here, where the story takes a dramatic turn. Some reports claim Shedeur didn't simply accept a traditional cash-heavy endorsement. Instead, rumors suggest he pushed for equity, allegedly restructuring the offer into a percentage ownership stake in Gatorade's US business. The number floating around online, 3%. Now pause for a second. 3% of $1 billion sports drink empire isn't small. If that figure were accurate, it would represent long-term wealth that could potentially eclipse a standard endorsement payout. We're talking about a shift from being paid to promote a product to potentially owning a slice of it. But here's the critical detail. There has been no official confirmation of a 3% ownership stake. No public SEC filing, no formal corporate announcement outlining equity terms, no breakdown verifying that structure. That's why this story sits in the category of rumor, powerful rumor, but still unconfirmed. And that distinction matters. Because in today's social media environment, projected valuations can quickly become accepted facts without documentation. A multi-year incentive-based contract can morph into an ownership headline overnight. A performance clause can be misinterpreted as equity. Still, even the possibility tells you something. Athletes across sports have increasingly pursued ownership stakes instead of flat endorsement checks. We've seen legends leverage equity to build generational wealth. So the idea that Shedeur, known for being business-minded, would explore similar structures doesn't feel impossible. It feels strategic. Supporters argue that if he negotiated equity, it signals long-term vision beyond football. Critics counter that without confirmation, the ownership narrative may be overstated. And that tension is exactly why this topic refuses to fade. If the 3% claim turns out to be accurate, it would mark one of the boldest financial plays by a young NFL quarterback in recent memory. If it's exaggerated, it still reveals something powerful about how his brand is being perceived, not just as an athlete, but as a potential business mogul. Either way, the Gatorade storyline adds another layer to the conversation. Because this isn't just about contracts anymore. It's about whether Shedeur Sanders is redefining how athletes approach power, leverage, and long-term wealth, or whether the internet simply amplified a negotiation into a legend. The draft night storyline was supposed to define him. For months, projections floated around placing Shedeur Sanders near the top of mock boards. Analysts debated his mechanics, his pocket presence, his decision-making under pressure. Some saw a franchise cornerstone. Others questioned whether the spotlight surrounding him and the expectations tied to his last name inflated the conversation. Then draft night happened, and he didn't go where many predicted. The slide wasn't catastrophic, but it was noticeable. Cameras caught reactions, commentators shifted tone, Social media split instantly. Some fans believed teams overthought it, others argued front offices saw things the public didn't. That moment could have framed his entire narrative. Instead, something unexpected happened. While the draft debate simmered, his brand presence exploded. Within weeks, endorsement conversations dominated headlines more than scouting reports. Fashion appearances, business rumors, marketing partnerships, they moved faster than typical rookie camp coverage. Instead of being boxed into draft position disappointment, he pivoted into visibility. And that shift raised eyebrows. Because in the traditional NFL pipeline, draft order carries weight. Higher picks get longer leashes. Lower selections fight uphill battles. That's the unwritten hierarchy. But Shedeur's off-field momentum didn't follow that script. Some reports suggested his jersey sales surged early compared to other rookies. While official league-wide breakdowns aren't always publicly detailed in real time, online retailers and fan discussions hinted at strong demand. Whether fueled by loyal supporters, cultural influence, or simple curiosity, his name stayed circulating. Meanwhile, comparisons started forming. Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, other high-profile prospects entering the league with their own hype cycles. On-field expectations remained the measuring stick. But off the field, Shedeur seemed to occupy a different lane, one where marketing gravity didn't align perfectly with draft order. And that created tension. Because football culture values production first. Critics quietly asked, is the brand moving faster than the resume? Is visibility outpacing validation? Those aren't attacks, they're performance-driven questions that always surface when spotlight and statistics don't rise at the same speed. Supporters, however, framed it differently. They argued draft position doesn't define ceiling. Front offices make conservative decisions all the time. If anything, sliding slightly could add fuel, motivation, edge, and building leverage outside of team control might actually increase long-term power. That's when the narrative subtly flipped. Instead of why did he fall, the conversation became, does it even matter? Because while draft boards fade once the season begins, brand equity compounds. And in today's NFL ecosystem, especially in the nil era's ripple effects, players aren't waiting for validation from one night in April. They're building ecosystems. Still, the pressure hasn't disappeared. Every snap now carries double meaning. If he thrives, the draft slide looks like a miscalculation. If he struggles, critics will revisit the hype cycle with sharper scrutiny. That's the reality of high visibility. The draft may not have crowned him at the very top, but it didn't shrink his platform either. If anything, it set the stage for a different kind of test, one where performance, perception, and power collide in real time. The spotlight is bright, but the football pressure is even brighter. No endorsement deal throws touchdowns, no runway appearance reads a blitz, and no equity rumor helps you convert third and 8 in the fourth quarter. At the end of the day, Shedeur Sanders still has to line up behind center and produce. And that's where this entire conversation tightens. Because the NFL doesn't care about Paris Fashion Week, it doesn't grade cultural influence. It evaluates wins, losses, turnovers, and leadership. The league is ruthless that way. Every rookie quarterback enters under scrutiny, but when your name dominates headlines before your snap count does, the expectations multiply. Some analysts have quietly asked whether the off-field attention creates unnecessary pressure. Not because business moves are wrong, but because the margin for error at quarterback is already razor thin. When you're viewed as a brand powerhouse, patience can shrink fast. If he starts hot, the narrative becomes legendary, visionary, ahead of the curve. If he struggles early, the tone shifts immediately. That's just how it works. Quarterbacks are judged differently than any other position. They're not just players, they're symbols of franchise direction. Veterans in the locker room notice everything. Coaches notice everything. When a rookie enters with massive endorsement visibility, it naturally creates a dynamic to manage. Not conflict, not resentment, but awareness. Because leadership in the NFL isn't handed out through marketing campaigns. It's earned in practice, in film sessions, in moments where teammates need you steady, not flashy. And this is where the debate quietly intensifies. Some fans believe Shedeur's confidence and brand presence enhance his leadership. They see a poised, media-trained quarterback who understands spotlight pressure and won't crumble under noise. That's a real advantage in today's hyperdigital sports environment. Others wonder if the brand narrative risks overshadowing football development. Quarterback growth is complex. It requires mechanical refinement, defensive recognition, patience in bad games. If headlines constantly frame you as a mogul in the making, critics will expect elite performance immediately. No grace period. And that's a heavy weight for any young player. It's also important to remember draft position still influences perception inside league circles. When a quarterback isn't selected at the very top, evaluators often feel validated if early struggles appear. Fair or not, confirmation bias exists in professional sports. So every throw becomes a statement. Every interception becomes amplified. Every fourth quarter drive becomes a referendum. That's the cost of visibility. The modern NFL quarterback isn't just competing against defenses, he's competing against narrative velocity. And Shedeur's narrative is moving fast, faster than most rookies ever experience. But here's the flip side. If he thrives under that pressure, the entire blueprint changes. Because then the story won't be about distraction. It will be about evolution, about how an athlete can build a business empire and still command a huddle, about how branding and ball control don't have to compete. That possibility is what makes this fascinating. The pressure is real, the scrutiny is real, the expectations are real. And none of them can be negotiated in a contract. They have to be answered on Sundays. That's the part no fashion house, no beverage company, and no marketing strategist can influence. In the NFL, performance still decides everything. And now the spotlight is waiting to see if Shedeur Sanders can match the momentum off the field with authority on it. Now the conversation shifts from millions to billions. It sounds dramatic, almost exaggerated, but once the endorsement figures, equity rumors, and long-term projections started circulating, a new question quietly entered the debate. Could Shedeur Sanders become a billionaire while still playing in the NFL? That's not a small claim. And to be clear, there is no verified public documentation placing him anywhere near billionaire status today. But some analysts and online commentators have speculated that if the reported deals, fashion partnerships, ownership stakes, long-term royalties, scale the way supporters believe they could, the trajectory becomes interesting. Very interesting. Because the modern athlete doesn't operate like athletes did 20 years ago. We've seen stars transition from players into moguls. Michael Jordan turned brand partnerships into global dominance. LeBron James built a diversified empire while still active in the league, but both of those financial explosions matured over time. Championships, longevity, global expansion. The difference here. The billionaire conversation around Shedeur is happening before his NFL resume is fully written. And that's what makes it polarizing. Supporters argue that the landscape has changed. NIL reshaped the college pipeline. Social media accelerates brand leverage. Global fashion houses now see quarterbacks as crossover icons. If endorsement deals include back-end royalties, equity clauses, or ownership percentages, even small ones' long-term wealth compounds differently. For example, rumors surrounding a potential equity stake in Gatorade sparked massive debate. And that's a key word, if a percentage ownership structure exists, the long-term upside would dwarf a traditional endorsement check. But again, there has been no confirmed documentation publicly verifying those numbers. Still, the speculation alone reveals something powerful. It shows how Shedeur is being positioned in the public imagination. Not just as a quarterback, not just as a rookie, but as a long-term business figure. And that's rare territory for someone this early in their professional arc. There's also the compounding effect of brand stacking. Fashion partnerships like the reported Amiri collaboration, beverage endorsements, apparel royalties, jersey sales splits. If structured strategically, multiple revenue streams create exponential growth over time. But here's the part that tempers the excitement. Revenue is not net worth. Valuations are not liquid cash. Projected deal totals are often calculated across years, performance incentives, and growth assumptions. A headline number doesn't mean instant billionaire status. It means potential, contingent on performance, market trends, brand health, and longevity. And in the NFL, longevity is never guaranteed. Quarterback careers can stretch 15 years, or they can pivot unexpectedly in 3. Injuries, coaching changes, roster instability, variables exist that no business plan can fully control. That's why some financial analysts remain cautious about the billionaire projections. They view the narrative as aspirational branding rather than immediate trajectory. But others see the blueprint forming. They argue that Shedeur's generation understands leverage earlier. They negotiate differently. They think in ownership terms. If you combine early brand awareness with disciplined investment strategy, billionaire conversations aren't fantasy, they're possibility. Still, possibility isn't certainty. And that's the tension driving this entire storyline. If he dominates on the field, the wealth narrative accelerates. Championships unlock global endorsements. Legacy multiplies valuation. The business ecosystem strengthens. If performance stalls, brands recalibrate, endorsements restructure, momentum slows. The billionaire conversation ultimately hinges on one core factor: sustained excellence. Because business empires attached to athletes don't survive on hype alone, they survive on credibility. Right now, Shedeur Sanders sits at a fascinating crossroads. The financial headlines are massive, the cultural positioning is aggressive, the speculation is loud. But the billionaire label, that's still unwritten. And that may be the most intriguing part of all. Because if the trajectory continues upward, if the rumored structures hold weight, if the endorsements compound, if the football production matches the marketing, then we may look back at this moment as the first chapter of something historic. Or we may view it as the peak of early momentum. Either way, the billionaire conversation isn't about what he has today. It's about what he could build tomorrow. And in the NFL, that future gets decided one season at a time. So where does all of this actually leave us? On one side, you have the Paris Fashion Week moment, the reported $80 million Amiri partnership, the ownership rumors tied to Gatorade, the jersey sales buzz, the billionaire projections. Layered together, it paints a picture of a young quarterback operating on a completely different financial wavelength than most rookies in NFL history. On the other side, you have reality. No Lombardi Trophy, no multi-year playoff resume, no established NFL legacy yet. And that contrast is exactly why this story feels so volatile. Because Shedeur Sanders isn't being discussed like a typical developing quarterback, he's being discussed like a movement, a business blueprint, a cultural shift, and whenever narrative runs ahead of on-field accomplishment, debate becomes inevitable. Some fans see icon status forming in real time. They point to his confidence, his poise in high-visibility environments, his understanding of leverage. They argue that the modern athlete must think beyond contracts and think in ownership. From that perspective, the fashion partnerships and reported equity structures aren't distractions, they're evolution. They believe he's ahead of the curve. Others aren't fully convinced. They don't necessarily deny the business savvy, but they question the timing, the scale, the amplification. They ask whether the financial headlines are inflating expectations to unrealistic levels, whether the spotlight could become heavier than necessary for a young quarterback still navigating defensive adjustments and professional speed. And that skepticism isn't rooted in hostility. It's rooted in football history. We've seen prospects crowned too early. We've seen marketing machines outpace performance. We've also seen doubted players rise and completely rewrite the narrative. That's why this moment is so fascinating. Because it's not settled. Even the reported deal structures remain partially unverified in public documentation. Numbers circulate quickly in today's media cycle, and projected valuations often get repeated as guaranteed payouts. Until full contract breakdowns are confirmed, some figures live in that gray zone between possibility and precision. The perception is powerful. And right now, the perception is that Shedeur Sanders represents a new prototype. A quarterback who doesn't wait for validation, a player building infrastructure while still building mechanics, a brand operating parallel to the helmet. The NFL has always valued toughness, leadership, and production, but the modern era also values reach, cultural magnetism, the ability to command attention beyond regional fan bases. If Shedeur thrives on the field, this entire narrative transforms from debate into validation. The Paris moment becomes visionary, the equity rumors become foresight, the billionaire conversation becomes trajectory. But if performance struggles, the same headlines will be reframed as premature hype. That's the razor's edge he stands on. And it's important to remember, visibility doesn't guarantee sustainability. The league is ruthless with quarterbacks. Defensive coordinators don't game plan around endorsement deals. They attack weaknesses, they force adjustments, they expose hesitation. Every Sunday will quietly answer the larger question. Is this legacy forming or marketing peaking? Because icon status isn't self-declared, it's earned through time, through resilience, through moments where pressure either sharpens you or swallows you. Right now, Shedeur Sanders exists in the early chapter of a story that feels unusually large for its age. The business side suggests long-term vision. The cultural side suggests generational alignment. The football side remains the ultimate proving ground. And maybe that's the real takeaway. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about watching closely. Because if he balances both worlds, if the confidence translates, if the leadership solidifies, if the production rises, then we may be witnessing the blueprint for the next era of NFL stardom. If not, the narrative will correct itself quickly. That's how this league works. So is Shedeur Sanders an icon in the making? Or are we watching one of the most aggressive hype cycles of the modern sports era? The answer isn't in Paris, it's not in projected net worth, it's not in rumored equity percentages. It's in the huddle. And the next few seasons will tell us everything we need to know.